Hey everybody. I had a question from a viewer about wiper systems, and so I'm going to dig in a little bit with that today and some diagnostic information. The question comes from a car that's an 83 model, and mine is an 85 model, and there may be some differences, but I have my 85 book. I'm going to work on the basis that they're probably similar systems. I did look up and check, and they take a different part number motor, but I don't know what the difference is between the motors. But I think the fundamentals of how the stalk operates, how the motor operates, how the washer pump operates is reasonably common across the years, at least to get you close. Now, I'm going to dig into the service manual here in a minute, but in this case, the question comes from someone who has actually replaced the windshield wiper motor, and I think replaced the pump as well, and he has the rear wiper and assembly, and the rear one isn't functioning, the washer pump is not functioning well. So you check the system over first, and when I say check the system, make sure that you're getting full battery voltage to the system. Make sure that your grounds are good. Now this motor bolts into the front dash, bolts into the sheet metal, and I believe those are the ground screw, that the grounds are actually brought in through the housing, through those screws. And so if you have corrosion there, that could be a problem. It's amazing sometimes, I'll tell you, through the years, I've been bit more than you can imagine with poor grounds, things that you thought should be perfectly well grounded that suddenly turn out not to be. So anyway, you can check the grounds, and you can sometimes check them with a meter. Take a volt ohm meter, and go from if it's the frame of the motor, go from the frame of the motor to a known good ground, and see if you, with the system trying to operate, and see if you get a voltage drop. Or flip it to resistance mode and see if you can measure resistance across. Voltage drop is usually better than a resistance measurement, because sometimes without any current the resistance will be kind of low, and when you get heavier current on it, sometimes it'll surprise you how much you get. But either way, you want to check and make sure you got really good grounds, and you want to make sure you check and have good voltage feeds. So from a basic, I'm going to go right here and say, the assumption from the book is that you've checked continuity of all the wiring harnesses before you get in much deeper, and that the mounting screws are tight and the fuses are good, and that the water hoses are not obstructed, that they're clear. And then they want you to, as I said a moment ago, they want you to check for the motor operation before removing it from the vehicle. Disconnect all the wiring, perform the following checks. If the wiper motor functions in all modes, and you got a good motor, then you're going to want to go to the multifunction lever test. If the wiper motor doesn't function, then you'll go to the diagnostic information. It says chart number 9, but I'm not sure I've got a chart numbered like that. So then they want you to check for washer pump operation by taking the harness off and going to terminal number 6 and putting 12 volts to it. So that's one of them where you're going to want a direct 12 volt power line. And again, if the motor runs and pumps, then the problem's in the switches and in the multifunction lever. Now, what it'll tell you is, over here, is that you can test the multifunction lever by going to the harnesses that you disconnect back here and go to those terminals and then set the switches, and you can measure from these two harnesses, you can measure whether the switches are working in the inside. And just one other thing here while we're here. To the comments about grounding, see, here's a ground strap that is connected in and has, you know, the motor, this motor is mounted with rubber grommets which won't ground. So here is a brass strip that's connected to the motor that goes underneath. I can't tell from here if it goes underneath the head of the bolt or if it goes underneath to the bracket. It must go to this washer. I haven't taken it apart yet. But if you lose that strap, you're going to have a hard time getting a good ground. And you could always, if you have any issues, you could always put a supplemental ground wire on here, clamp one on, or put something under one of these, some place where you can clamp a ground wire and then get it to the chassis someplace. This is for, there are two sets of motors, right? There's a motor that is just 2 speeds, and then there's one that's a pulse one that lets you do variable. And the tests are just a little bit different, but not a lot. So if you look, this is the schematic diagram. And to my comments about relays in my earlier video, there's the diode, transient suppressor diode on this circuit. There's the park switch that gets activated when things park. So I just showed you there are 2 connectors. Well, here's the 2-pin connector on the bottom of the motor. That's the one down here. And then there's a 4-pin right there. And that's the one here on the end of the motor. Now, then they'll show you this switch arrangement. And understand that when you read this diagram, you know, like there is off, that would connect these 2 bars. And the same thing here, it says low. Low would connect those 3 bars across if you were in low. If you were in high, you'd get these 3 bars across. And you can see there's a split here, and you'd pick up a different connection if you're in high than if you're in low. And here's ignition switch, power, fuse. So that's the hot part. And in off, this connection would be hot, number 3, which goes over to the park switch. There's a table just explaining how the system is intended to function, depending on which buttons you push. So here for the 2-speed version of the motor, see, here's what they want you to connect. Here's pins 4 and 5 on the end of the motor. Here's 1, 2, 3, and 6. 6 is up there. And here are the diagrams where if you were testing low, it says put a jumper between 3 and 4 and put 12 volts to 1 and 2, and that should make the motor run in low speed. And here, if you were going to do high speed, you'd have a jumper between 1 and 2, a jumper over between 3 and 4, and then put 12 volts on number 5. And that would do is simulate the switch that's inside the car, but you've got the harness disconnected. So you got to be able to, you got to get a set of terminals and jumper wires that will pick up those tabs to do that. And then here, if you want them to park, you know, it's 12 volts down on 1, jumpers between 3 and 4. If you want the washer pump to run, then, well, that one's down over on this corner. If you want the washer pump to run, you put 12 volts on 6, and then the washer pump should run. Then if you want to test the switch with these connectors disconnected, then you use a voltmeter across. And you can use a voltmeter to ground for some terminals, and some, let me show you down below here. And here's the table, both for a pulse version And for a standard version, where it says C, that's a connection. So terminal 1 and terminal 4 have C's. That's because they're connected together. If you go up here, terminal 1 will connect to terminal 4 all the time. It's a connected one instead of grounding. So if you put your voltmeter, if you put an ohm meter across and measure from 1 to 4, you should get a connection. Always, because it should just be a jumper. Then, if you go through this table where it says B+, you should be getting power from the battery, from the switch. You should, if you turned on the ignition, you should see with a voltmeter on those terminals. So on terminal 2, right there, if you put, I'll go down and use standard here for a minute. So terminal 2 would do nothing here, but if you put terminal 2 in low, you should see battery voltage to ground. Because battery voltage will be on this, one, and if you have 2 up here, you put it in low, these 3 will be connected together, so you'll get battery voltage on 2, and you should then also get battery voltage on 3. And if we come down to the table, there you go, battery voltage is on 3. So this is what you'd call a truth table. It's what the connections in this switch ought to be doing for off, pulse, low, high, and wash. And if you don't have pulse, then these sections are blanked out. But you, again, with the ignition switch on, if you grounded your voltmeter, negative to ground, and then measured these terminals in each of the switch positions, that's what you should measure. Now, this one here, number 6. Number 6 is the wash button, and on a pulse system, it will be less than battery voltage. It'll be 10 to 12, with the exception of here at the end where it says wash, then you'll get full battery voltage. But when the switch is off, see, I need to turn the page. If I go over to the one for the pulse system, see, when you get to the pulse system, you have a circuit board in here, an electronic circuit board that runs the washer motor, and then the multifunction lever has a couple of different resistors in it. There's a 1.2 megohms, looks like 24 and 1.2 megs. That's pretty big. But anyway, that will result in your voltage coming around here and coming off to terminal 6 will be something less than 12 volts unless you push the wash button and bypass those guys. But other than that, the pulse system should look very close, very similar. And here's an on-the-car check again for if you have the pulse system instead of where you connect your jumper wires for high speed, low speed, park, and for pulse. That's added to this one. And then over here is the table for how the pulse system is intended to operate. Now they also tell you for the washer pump that if you need, you can remove it, take it out of the cover, and apply voltage to the terminals for only a second or two and see if the pump operates. If it doesn't, then it says go to see the wiper washer switch test. I take that back. If it doesn't operate, replace the pump. They wrote this wrong. If it does operate, then you would need to go look at the switches. It looks like a misprint. And there's that table again. Here's another depiction of a pulse system switch. And this one's kind of nice because they actually show you what the terminals look like on the ends of the connectors. And here's their table of probable causes. I'm not going to read through all of those, but if you have something that's bad, this is what they consider the normal explanation. But again, I'm going to say that table only applies if you have ground and if you have power and if everything else in the system is correct. They also referenced on the pulse system, they referenced this table 44 here. And it says if you go and measure resistance off of terminal 3, that you should see resistance measurements to ground in that range. That came back here to wiper washer switch test. It says if the switch shows the following resistance readings, the wiper washer circuit board cover is defective. And once again, that's this table dash 44. That last one, this test is, I believe, for a Berlinetta style, not for our regular car with pulse or standard wipers, because it has a different set of connectors. There's 5-terminal and a 2-terminal, and so the motor cover and design is different. Now for the rear system, it has an independent washer pump that you ought to be able to also test independently. And the only thing I can advise with that washer pump is the question said that the pump was working, but it would only pull fluid if you used a funnel, and it wasn't developing enough suction to pull out of that tank, which again sort of sounds like a power or ground issue where it's not getting the motor's not developing full performance, is what it sounds like. Could also be a plug up. You may need to verify that the hoses are free and clear, that they're flowing properly. But they do give a spec if you're working on the rear wiper with how much current it should draw, and there's the circuit for it. Now, if you're having trouble with the washers flowing, these have what they call fluidic nozzles that spray across the windshield. In the nozzle, there's a small plastic element that makes the stream oscillate and spreads out the droplets. What they're saying is, though, if the nozzles become plugged, apply air pressure to unplug them. It says if it remains plugged, you need to replace the nozzle. Now, I don't know on a car this old whether you can find them or whether you would have to retrofit a nozzle from a newer car, but I would say if they're plugged, the next thing I would do is see if it's a plastic element, is see if there's something you could use, some kind of a cleaner to something that cleans rust and lime deposits or something in case you had hard water in there. But otherwise, you need to make sure that they'll flow air. Well, that's a quick look at how the wiper system diagnostic goes. And if your motor's not working, if you're not getting water flow, work through the basics first, and then bypass the switches, see if your motor and pump work. If they do, then go in and diagnose the switches, because it's quite possible that you'd have one of the switches in the turn signal stalk is bad or not making good contact, or even to the switches, you may not have a good voltage feed coming into that switch. So make sure that your ignition feed into the system is good and that you're getting the voltages that you should. I hope that helps. That's all for now.